All right, Chapter 28. Early in October 1902, vast volumes of smoke of unknown origin obscured all things at sea and made navigation difficult and dangerous from the Philippines to Hong Kong and from the Philippines to Australia. I do not know of anything of terrestrial origin that, with equal density, ever has had such widespread effects. Vesuvius has never been known to smoke up the whole Mediterranean. Compared with this obscuration, smoke at the distance from Krakatoa in August 1883 was only a haze. For an account, see the Journal Royal Meteorological Society 30-285, Hong Kong Telegraph, October 25th, that a volcanic eruption in Sumatra had been reported. Science, NS 23-193, that there had been no known eruption in Sumatra. That perhaps there had been enormous forest fires in Borneo and Sumatra. Sarawak, Borneo. Gazette, October-November 1902. No record of any such fires. There came something that was perhaps not faster, but that was more substantial. If a story of a sandstorm in a desert is dramatic, here is a story of a continent that went melodramatic. Upon the 12th of November, upon all Australia, except Queensland, dust and mud fell from the sky. Then densest darkness lit up with glares. Fires were falling from the sky. Sometimes there are abortive embryos that are mixtures, an eye looking out from ribs, other features scattered. Fires and dust and darkness, mud that was falling from the sky. Australia was a womb that was misconceiving. A fireball burst over a mound which flickered, and frightened sheep ran from it, or, reflecting glares in the sky, a breast leered and stuck out a long red mob of animals. A furrowed field or ribs in a haze, and a star from the embers of a bushfire. An avenue of trees heavy with mud sagging upon a road that was pulsing with carts, or black lips far from jaws closing soggily upon an umbilical cord in vainly attempted suicide. Fireballs started up fires in every district in Victoria. They fell into cities and set fire to houses. At Witchproof, the whole air seemed on fire all day of the 12th, and the next day dust, mostly red dust, sifted down upon Australia, falling upon the 13th, and Queensland too. Smoke rolled in upon northern Australia upon the 14th. The substance that fell from it was said to be ashes. One of the descriptions is of a light, fluffy gray material. How many of those who have a notion that they're pretty well read have ever heard of this discharge upon Australia? And what are the pretty well read but the pretty well led? Little of this tremendous occurrence has been told in publications that are said to be scientific, and I take from the Australian newspapers, but accounts of some of their fireballs that fell from the sky were published in Nature, volume 67. There are reports from about 50 darkened, stifled towns in the Sydney Herald of the 14th. Business suspended. Nothing like it before in the history of the colony. People stumbling around the lanterns. Traffics were gropes. Mail coaches reached Sydney 9 hours late. Ashes with a sulphurous odor fell in New Zealand upon the 13th. The cities into which fell balls of fire that burned houses were Boort, Allendale, Delaquin, Langdale, and Chiltern. Smoke appeared in Java, and the earth quaked. A meteorite fell at Kamsagar, India. Upon this day of the 12th, a disastrous deluge started falling in the Malay states. Along one river, 7 bridges were carried away. There was no investigation. However, passing awareness did glimmer in one mind in England. In a dispatch to the newspapers, December 7, 1902, Sir Norman Lockyer called attention to the similarity between the dust of the fireballs in Australia and the dust and the fireballs from volcanoes in the West Indies in May of this year. Our own expression depends upon whether all this can be attributed to any eruption upon this earth or not. The smoke in October cannot be so explained, but was there any particular volcanic activity upon this earth about November 12, 1902? The most violent eruption of Kilauea, Hawaii in 20 years was occurring, having started upon the 10th of November. There was a geyser of fire from the volcano Santa Maria in Guatemala, having started upon October 26th. About the 6th of November, Colima in Mexico began to discharge dense volumes of smoke. The volcano Salavili in Samoa broke out upon the 13th, having been active, though to no great degree, upon October 30th. According to a dispatch dated November 14th, there was an eruption in the Windward Islands, West Indies. Stromboli burst into eruption upon the 13th. About this time, Mount Colapata in Peru broke out. With the smoke that appeared with an earthquake in Java was the spans of an ocean and a continent far away. New Zealand is near all these volcanoes except Stromboli, then is Australia, but dust and ashes fell a day later in New Zealand. Fireballs fell enormously in Australia. Not one was reported in New Zealand. Nothing appeared between New Zealand and these volcanoes but dense clouds of smoke between Australia and the Philippines, delayed vessels until at least November 20th. So we regard the unexplained smoke of October and November as continuous with the discharges of November 12th and relate both as emanations from one source, which is undiscoverable upon this earth. There was a new star, Popular Astronomy 3060, that in October 1902, a new star appeared in the southern constellation Puppis. Upon the 19th of November, a seismic wave 6 feet high crashed upon the coast of South Australia. Upon this day, the new star shone at its maximum of 7th magnitude. See our expression upon phenomena of August 1885. If in November 1902 a volcanic discharge came to Australia from a southern constellation, it came as if from a star region to the nearest Earth region. But if constellations be trillions of miles away, no part of this Earth could be appreciably nearer than any other part to any star. So extraordinary was terrestrial volcanic activity at this time that it will have to be considered. Like other expressions, our expression here is that mutually effective outbursts spread from the land of the stars to and through the land of this earth, firing off volcanoes in the disturbances of one organic or relatively little whole. It was a time of extremist drought in Australia. Thunderstorms that came after November 12th were described as terrific. As a glimmer of awareness, Lockyer told of the fireballs that came with the dust to Australia, and the suggestion to him was that there had been a volcanic discharge. But there was something that he did not tell. He did not know. It was told of in no scientific publication, and it reached no newspaper published outside Australia. After the first volley of fireballs, other fireballs came to Australia. I have searched in newspapers of all continents, and it is my statement that no such fireballs were reported anywhere else. All were so characterized that it will be accounted that all were of one stream. Perhaps they came from an eruption in the constellation Puppis, but my especial expression is that if all were of one origin, and if, days apart, they came to this earth only to Australia, they so localized, because this earth is stationary. For references, see the Sydney Herald and the Melbourne Leader. There was a meteoric explosion at Parramatta, November 13th. A fireball fell and exploded terrifically at Karkor. At Murrumbumbura, north-southwest, dust and a large fireball fell upon the 18th. A fireball passed over the town of Nyngan, night of the 22nd, intensely illuminating sky and ground. Upon the night of the 20th, as reported by Sir Charles Todd of the Adelaide Observatory, a large fireball was seen, moving so slowly that it was watched for minutes. At 11 o'clock, night of the 21st, a fireball of the apparent size of the sun was seen at Toitita. An hour later, several towns were illuminated by a great fireball. Upon the 23rd, a fireball exploded at Ipswich, Queensland. It is of especial importance to note the record of one of those bombs or meteors that moved so slowly that it was watched for minutes. Excuse me. From February 12th to March 1st, 1903, dusts and discolored rains fell along the western coasts of Africa upon many parts of the European continent and in England. The conventional explanation was published. There had been a whirlwind in Africa. I have plotted for more than 20 years in the libraries of New York and London. There are millions of persons who would think this a dreary existence, but the challenges, the excitements, the fines, any pronouncement by any orthodoxy is to me the same as handcuffs. It's brain cuffs. There are times when I don't give a damn whether the stars are trillions of miles away or tens of miles away, but at any time, let anybody say to me, authoritatively or with an air of finality, that the stars are trillions of miles away or tens of miles away, and my contrariness stirs or inflames, and if I can't pick the lock of his pronouncements, I'll have to squirm out some way to save my egotism. So then the dusts of February and March 1903 and the whirlwind explanation, and other egotists will understand how I suffer. Simply say to me, mere dust from an African desert, and I begin to squirm like an Houdini. February 12th to March 1st, 1903, dust from an African desert. I get busy. Nature 75589, that some of this dust which had fallen at Cardiff, Wales, had been analyzed and that it was probably volcanic. But the word analyzed is an affront to my bigotries, conventional chemist, orthodox procedures, scientific delusions, more coercions. I am pleased with a find in the London Standard, February 26, 1903. It is of no service to me, especially now, but in general it is agreeable to my malices, a letter from Professor T.G. Bonney, in which the professor says that the dust was not volcanic because there was no glassy material in it. And a letter from somewhere else stating that the specimens of the dust that were examined by him, all the particles were glassy. It was dust from an African desert, but I have resources. One of them is Al-Maghreb. How many persons beside myself have ever heard of Al-Maghreb? Al-Maghreb is my own discovery. The dust came down in England, Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, and along the west coast of Africa. Here's the question. If there had been an African hurricane so violent as to strew a good part of Europe, is it not likely that there would have been awareness of it in Africa? Al-Maghreb, Tangier, no mention of any atmospheric disturbance that would bear out the conventional explanation. Lagos, Weekly Record, Sierra Leone, Weekly News, Egyptian Gazette, no mention. And then one of those finds that make plotting in libraries as exciting as prospecting for nuggets. February 14th of this year, one of the most extraordinary phenomena in the history of Australia. In magnitude, it was next to the occurrences of the preceding November. In the blackest of darkness, dust and mud fell from the sky. Melbourne Age, February 16th, 3 columns of reports upon darkness and dust and falling mud in about 40 widespread towns in New South Wales and Victoria. The material that fell in Australia fell about as enormously as fell the dusts in Europe. There is no mention of it in any of the dozens of articles by conventionalists upon the phenomena in Europe. It started falling 2 days after the first fall of dust west of Africa. It was a coincidence, or here is an instance of 2 enormous volumes of dust that had one origin. There was an unnoticed hurricane in Africa which strewed Europe and daubed Australia, precipitating nowhere between these 2 continents. Or 2 vast volumes of dust were discharged from a disturbance somewhere beyond this earth, drifting here, arriving so nearly simultaneously that the indications are that the space between the source and this stationary earth is not of enormous extent, but was traversed in a few days or a few weeks. There was no known eruption upon this earth at this time. If here, but unknown, it would have to be an eruption more tremendous than any of the known eruptions of this earth. There was a new star. It was found by a professional astronomer upon photographs of the constellation Gemini taken upon March 8th. It may have existed a few weeks before somebody happened to photograph this part of the sky. Cold-blooded scientists, as we hear them called, and their ideal of accuracy. They're more like a lot of spoiled brats, willfully determined to have their own way. In Cosmos, NS69-422 were reported meteoric phenomena before the destructive earthquake in Calabria, Italy, September 8, 1905. It was said, or it was announced, that Professor Agamemnon was investigating. It would have been a smash to conventional science if Professor Agamemnon had confirmed these reports. We know what to expect. According to the account in Cosmos, first came a fall of meteors, and then 3/4 of an hour later, to this same place upon this probably stationary Earth, came a great meteor. It exploded, and in the ground was a shock by which 4,600 buildings were destroyed and 4,000 persons were killed. A volume of sound from crashing walls and billows of roars from falling roofs sailed like a ship in a storm. When it sank, lamentations leaped from it. Because of underlying oneness, the sounds of a catastrophe are renderable in the terms of any other field of phenomena. Structural principles are the same, either in phonetic or biologic anatomy. A woe or an insect or a centipede is a series of segments. Or the wreck of a city was a cemetery. Convulsed into animation, it was Resurrection Day, as not conceived of by religionists. What is that word? Concatenations of sounds arose from burials. Spinal columns of groans were exhuming from ruination. Articulations of sobs clung to them. A shout that was jointed with oaths reached out from a hole. A church, which for centuries had been the den of a parasite, sank to a heap. It was a maw that engulfed a congregation. From it came the chant of a litany that was a tapeworm emerging from a ruptured stomach. Choruses broke into moans that were rows of weeping willows. A prayer crossed a field of murmurs and was gored by a blasphemy. Tellers of beads told ladders up which ran profanities. Then came submergence again in a chorus. In earthquake lands, it is the belief of the people that there is a goddess or a godness that at times of catastrophes directs them to flock to churches. My own theology is in agreement. It is by such concentrations that the elimination of surplusages is facilitated. But in Virgin Mary's were replaced by images of Mrs. Sanger, there would be no such useful murders. It is said in the Bulsac Astro de France, October 1905, that luminous phenomena had preceded this catastrophe in Calabria. Observations upon appearances in the sky were gathered by Professor Alfani and were recorded by him in the Revista de Fisca. But it was Professor Agamemnon's decision upon reported phenomena in the sky that was awaited by the scientific world. From time to time, in scientific periodicals, there was something to the effect that he was investigating. Not only meteors were told of, there was a fall of dust from the sky at Terilio. Explained. There had been an eruption of Stromboli.